Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third and last session on selecting methodology in research design for qualitative research. So today we're going to bring everything together and try everything that needs to be covered because this is our last session. As possible, but not too fast that you are not following me. Yesterday, we were still talking about the different ways in which to collect data. How do we collect data based on the variance of the different research designs that we have chosen? We started with focus groups, and now we're going to move on to the participant observation. So your role as a researcher, if you are doing participant observation, and remember, this also forms part of ethnographic or ethnography as a research design. So, and there are different ways in which you can conduct ethnography. And one of the ways which we have already discussed, and now we're looking at how do you collect the data if you choose the complete participant observer as the ethnography mode or approach or design that you're going to be using. So with complete participant observer, which is often not used because of the challenges that it also identifies, or the challenges that it presents, is that when you are a complete participant observer, people do not know that you're there, but you are there and conducting research. So it conceals your role as a researcher. Your role is concealed, and also it's non-participative, right? So there's no participation, you're just observing. And sometimes you may even observe behind one-way glass or one-way mirror. Those who are in psychology might know when reading psychology textbooks, some of the psychological experiments involve looking at people through a one-way mirror. And sometimes people do not know that they are being observed, their behavior is being observed for the purpose of conducting research. And you'll see as we continue engaging that with complete participant observer, it becomes an ethical dilemma, an ethical challenge as a researcher conducting research following complete non-participation. And then the types of observations that one might do is completely structured and systematic observation, where you have an observation schedule, where you know that I'm going to observe between 9 and 12 in the morning, and these are the specific things that I'm going to be observing, and I'm going to observe these things or people over this extended period of time. So it's completely just observing, and it's only specific things that are observed. Okay, so going back to our example of the market, you know, the market is busy, is buzzing, is hustling. There are many things happening at the same time at the market. And based on the focus of your research, you're obviously not going to be looking at everything that's happening there. So there are specific things that you're interested in. How does negotiation happen? How do people interact with each other? Who are the people that come to the market at a particular time of the day? So you're only specifically looking at particular aspects of the market. So this is when it's completely structured. And your observation, you're not just observing generally the phenomenon of the market, but you're looking specifically at particular aspects of the market. And then there's also unstructured, which is, as I said, you're looking at the overall overview. What does a day at the market look like? What does it entail? So you're not focusing on any specific aspect. You're just interested in what happens at the market, right? And as I've said, if you are just observing and there is no interaction or no participation at all from your participants and your identity is concealed, people do not know that you are observing them, then obviously there's going to be some ethics or ethical dilemmas that one needs to contend with. And the issue of informed consent becomes a challenge, because if your role is concealed, if people do not know that you're observing them, how will they give you permission to observe them? So it violates that principle of privacy. And then you go and you make your conclusions and interpretations just based on observing people that did not know that they were being observed. So obviously this type of research happens very, 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 very rarely. And it's special what permission that would need to be given, and you would really need to justify why it's important for you to do this kind of research. Right? So if you're interested, I don't know, in gang life or something like that, where you do not want people to know the intentions of you being there. Think of an example of an undercover investigator, for example. But remember, you are an academic investigator, research investigator. So it's a different kind of investigation altogether. So it becomes very tricky to be able to do this kind of research, but it's important for you to know about it, know that it exists, in case you might be the kind of person that's interested in research that is very, very obscure, that requires your participants to not know that you are there. Like I said, you would need to really justify this to the ethics committee. And when you are doing your observations, obviously, for you to be able to do interpretation, you need to record everything that you take. So you can video record. Again, see ethical dilemmas. How do you video record people without their consent, right? Taking notes, that is something that you can do, but using those notes without people knowing what it is that you're going to be saying about them, because it means you cannot go back to your participants and do member checking. Right? So you can conduct observations at 3 different levels: at the level of description, at the level of analysis, at the level of reflections. So you're describing what you see at the market. You're describing and noting every little detail that you see. And as you do that, you do not make any judgments or conclusions, because then you have to sit with this data and say, what is this data telling me, right? So you interpret what was observed. This is analysis. What comes after the description? What does it mean? How do I make sense of it? And I'm sure you can see the tricky part here. How can you be able to answer some of the gaps or questions that you might be left with, because you cannot go back, right? And as you reflect again, how you reflect on your description and analysis, how was this done? What methods did you use? And then the ethical issues and problems here, you need to really deeply engage with that, because there's quite a number of them, and indicate how you've worked around or dealt or responded to the ethical dilemmas that you're confronted with. Reactions of the observers, even though they didn't know who you are, what your role is. Did people think it was strange to see somebody like you, or were you immersing yourself in the community and they didn't even realize that perhaps you are not one of the market people? So you clarify and then further inquiry if there needs be. So I'm just going to move quickly on this one, and then the observations happen on site. You make notes and you can take video recordings. And then when you've taken your notes, you have to be specific in terms of painting a picture of what you've observed. So the space, who was there, the activities that were happening, what objects did you notice, at what time did what happen, what do you think were some of the goals of people going to the market, and people, did they seem happy, the expressions that you saw. So all of these things would be things that form part of you being a complete observer as a researcher. And why do you want to go through all this trouble? Because you want live data. You don't want a recollection of what it means or it looks like to be at the market, but you actually want to see the action, the activity as it happens, right? First-hand information, and you want to experience the context. And you also looking consciously at things and noticing things that other people might not notice because they are not consciously looking and thinking about activities at the market. Okay. All right. So that is observation and participant observation, or just complete observation as an ethnographer doing research, qualitative research in the field. And then we also have what we call visual methods. And visual methods have become popular over time. And we can link visual methods with the critical emancipatory paradigm because of the interactive nature, mostly, not all the time, the interactive nature of visual methodologies, right? So visual research is a qualitative research that relies on artistic expressions of seeing something, performing something that people can see, can engage with. And it involves things such as film, things such as photography, drawings, paintings. For those of you who are in the creative arts space, those who might be from the Department of Music and Arts, for example, here at UNISA, these are some of the things that would or could make sense to you. So visuals in the sense of actually creating and doing something with your hands, but also visuals even when it comes to the creative, more online spaces, looking at interactive ways of conducting research or of meaning making also. So the artistic medium, what does it do? It assists us to get rich source of information, and it captures reality in ways that sometimes we might miss if we're just talking about experiences. And they reveal information about what the medium captures. So what is behind the lens? What is it that the artist, the creator, the photographer is looking at? And how do they capture that which they're looking at? So using photography as an example, the photographs taken illustrate reality and give information about the photographer through the angle of the camera, right? So the images that are taken in a particular moment that they were taken creates a story around how people see reality, how they understand reality. So, and again, also with drawings and paintings, and we know the kinds of emotions sometimes that they elicit. We've had stories in the media about various forms of images that we see and how they affect people, right? So images are essential in different sorts of inquiries on a wide range of topics. So it actually opens up to different forms of wanting to gather data or to understand phenomena. One could be, it could be, or you could choose it based on the research question that you're asking. After visual material is created, the collection may be the base of further discussion. So you can sit down with the person who's taken the photographs and have a further engagement based on the photograph. So what made you take this particular photograph? What made you take this particular picture at this particular moment? What were the choices? Then the process of choosing, because that also tells a lot about how people make sense of their reality, or the reality as it presents itself in their eyes. So imagine if you give 10 people cameras and you say, okay, go into your community and take images of what poverty looks like in your community. And do you think those 10 people are going to come back with the very same image or images? Chances are they're not. So already that gives you an indication of how imagery, how pictures also tells a story, or people choose pictures and capture pictures that will tell the story of how they perceive the world, how they understand the world. Okay, so that's one of the ways in which we think about visual methods. And it was Caroline Wang and Mary Burris who came up with what we call photo voice. And photo voice is popular in the social sciences, in your psychology, your sociology. And here, the participants are provided with a camera, with the example that I've just given now, on taking a camera and going into the community and saying, what does poverty look like in my community, right? So they give an account of the experience, things that are important to them, things that they see as worth telling, as worth capturing. So in this way, people's lived experiences become known, and sometimes we even pay attention to things that people might have otherwise overlooked or ignored, either the participant or you as the researcher. The kinds of questions that you would ask, the interview questions. Remember, you decide on the questions that you're going to ask. But what photo voice does and what it allows you to do is that it moves beyond an interview schedule. So you give people a prompt, basically just one question saying, what does poverty look like in your community, right? And it means there's just one question that you ask. And people then go out and they take 5 or 10 pictures. You can say maybe take 10 images or take 5 images. And then from there, a story emerges, a narrative emerges. And that way, again, what does it do? It also gives a lot of power to the participants in terms of them deciding and telling what kind of experience they want to share. Right? I hope that makes sense in terms of the difference between you having 10 questions in an interview guide vis-a-vis just giving somebody a camera and saying, just go and explore and tell me the story of poverty in this particular community. And then, of course, we also have film. And film is also one of the ways in which you can use to gather data. And it's not just shooting footages, but it's with a particular focus in mind, because remember, you have a research question that you are interested in. So what visual representation are you interested in? What ideas are you interested in, right? So within the social sciences, again, people maybe who are in communication science or even people in film studies might be drawn to wanting to use film as part of their data gathering. If you do not have an understanding or background in film, you might miss important aspects of what must be entailed when one shoots a film. You know, because lighting is important. The picture, the color is important. The characters are important. The interaction that happens is important. So there are different ways in which one can look at this. And even as you choose film as a data gathering tool, you also need to think about what is the focus going to be. So you're going to document or film the participants as they go about doing their work. Are you going to be showing a film, an already existing film, to participants and then asking them about their opinion? Remember yesterday we were talking about vignettes. So it could be some form, or it's another form of thinking about a vignette, where a film is used, and not maybe a short story, but a film where people watch something is used as a prompt. And then after that, you have a conversation and said, what did you see in that film? What things stood out for you in that film? What are some of the issues that you found difficult? What was the moment that you thought was impactful for you as you were watching? So then you come up with questions where you have a conversation around the film. So the film then becomes a tool that you use for you to gather the information or the data that you want to gather. Or the third one is asking the participants to make a film. And these days, again, with the smartphones, the gadgets that people have, it's something that people can do, right? So people can use their phones, or if you have a lot of funding, you can provide the gadgets for people, because that can also be a limitation. You're interested in using film as a data collection tool, but do the people that you want to involve in your study have the gadgets that are required? Do they have smartphones that can take or make films? So if that is not the case, then you need to have funding to be able to make that possible. So you also then need to think about, if I choose this data collection method, is it going to be practical for me to actually succeed in my study, having chosen this, because of the possible funding that might be required there? So using film for research and deriving a method from film can take very different forms and directions. So in the natural sciences, again, the focus would be different. In the humanities, the focus would be different. So film produces visual evidence, as we've said, by way of recording, by way of visualizing, by way of archiving, because it's also something that you will then have that is in itself already an output in some sense. And it's got motion sequences because there's movements, there's interaction, there's flow. But if you are in the humanities, for example, and you are in philosophy studies, or you are in theology or languages, you can still consider creative ways in which you could use film to make your study more interesting, or as a way for you to think outside the box as well, so that we can say your study is novel, your study is actually unique, it brings something new. In philosophy, how many people produce films as essays, as storytelling, as philosophical iterations or interactions, or thinking about life, about reality, about things that keep us awake at night, but using film as a method to think about philosophical issues and to write about philosophical issues. That could be very interesting. So film can also be a source of contributing to historiography. As I said, if you're going to be archiving the work that you're going to use, if you were to go now, for example, to the SABC, they have an archives section. So if you're interested in a film or something that was shown in 1980 or something, so that's part of historiography. So film also allows for that, right? Where you can also display history and human ideas, human desires through film. So you're telling us about, or teaching us, or showing us information about history. Those of you who are in history, again, this is also an option, a possibility to think about how we can reimagine history and knowledge production within history discipline through film, right? And in the context of artistic research, Film offers methodological approaches to linking science and art, ranging from experimental film to documentaries. We see a lot of documentaries, but also fiction as well, where it's really about creative outputs. And I think when it comes to fiction as well, those of you who are in languages where we deal a lot with fiction and the imagination and telling stories, and how fiction can also be made into movement and visual imagery that one could engage with in a different way. So these would be what you would then call video essays. So that's one of the ways in which you can collect your data. And then we have what we call photo historias. And this was introduced by Gomez and Vanini. And photo historias is also a variation of what we've already spoken about, which is photo voice. And it started specifically looking at the experiences of immigrant workers. There's a lot of movement of people around the world. Migration is very rife. And when people get into foreign lands, and trying to adjust and trying to make meaning of their lives in these different contexts, sometimes there are challenges that they are confronted with. Access to jobs, access to healthcare, access to education. So marginalized communities' experiences within particular contexts sometimes become very difficult to express and to engage with. So what Gomez and Vanini did was, how about we look at another way in which people can tell their stories? They can tell the stories of not only where they are right now in their experiences, but also the histories of where they come from as well. So here it's not only about taking pictures of the context where you are, but it's also drawing from pictures that already exist. So people's pictures or photos that they have of their home countries, their hometowns, and how these stories actually, or these images or photos actually tell stories of where people come from. I know when one looks at the Holocaust, which is one of the historical moment or phenomena that many of us know about, one of the things that has been central in remembering, in thinking back, in reclaiming, is also based on the photos that people have. So a lot of families lost valuables at that time. So I remember I was watching is it a movie or a documentary, but how people managed to reclaim some of the artworks of their families, some of the photo or the jewelry of their families that was stolen. And how they managed to have this reclaiming was because of the family photos. That my grandmother in this year was wearing this necklace, and now I'm seeing this necklace at a museum, or I'm seeing this necklace as part of private collection of some rich person, and you happen to see that. So people have actually managed to win cases and have managed to reclaim some of the family heirlooms based on the photos. And so Gomez and Vanini were saying photo historians are very important in thinking about people's histories. And it also gives people agency about their own lives, their own histories, their own families, their own countries. So those are some of the examples of data collection methods that you can think about. So we were just finishing up based on where we were yesterday and what we were talking about yesterday. And now we're going to move on to the next aspects of research, qualitative research methodologies. And before we get to the last aspect, which is analysis, data analysis, I thought it would be important for us to also speak about the importance of triangulation. Data triangulation. When we speak about the credibility of the data, the validity of the data, one of the ways in which to do this is also through data triangulation. And this is where you, as the researcher, use two or more methods to gather your data or for the verification of your data, right? And you use it to ensure that the data is robust, to make sure that your data is comprehensive, and to make sure that your data is well developed. It's great and useful, but as you will see, it's also time consuming as well. All right. Data triangulation is also cross-examination, as I was saying, that you cross examine the data and the information that you would have received, right? Because it assists you to double or even triple check the results that you have obtained from your research. Here, or the rationale behind it, is that you can be more confident in increasing the credibility, as I've already indicated, and the validity of your research. So how do you then apply or use, or in what ways can you triangulate your data? At what level and how? And here I'm also on the link here. When you get the slides, I'm going to encourage you to please go and read more. Go to these links and read more. Some of this data or the presentation is taken from these sources, but obviously it's not all the information. So I'm offering you these links so that you can be able to go and read further on this. Okay. All right. So what are the different types of data triangulation? The different types of data triangulation could be methodological. You use different qualitative or quantitative methods to check for consistency in the data. And this is what you would already, well, often, or what you would be familiar with. Many of us are familiar with this because that is what we mostly use. When we're thinking about data triangulation, most of the time we're thinking, oh, okay, it means combining qualitative and quantitative methods. And that is how you will then triangulate your data. So you will conduct interviews and then maybe also use a questionnaire. And then you analyze the data quantitatively, you analyze the data qualitatively, and then you can see and check whether the results, what is emanating from the data, is the same for both qualitative and quantitative. But also you use that to make sure that you want to get generalizability, for example, this side, but you also want to understand the experiences and get depth in terms of the research that you're doing. And once again, when we go back, what will lead you to deciding on how or what type of triangulation to use is your research question, right? What is it that you're interested in? Are you interested in experiences, in exploring, or are you interested in also looking at the correlation and the factors that influence something? So what you are asking in the beginning will then make us sit down and say, okay, based on what you're interested in, it would make sense, therefore, for the study to be both quantitative and qualitative. So you're kind of using mixed methods there. Okay. And then we also have theory triangulation. And theory triangulation involves using different theoretical perspectives to make inferences about a distinct set of data. And as you can imagine, this might take a lot of time, and it might be difficult because you also at the same time bringing possibly different disciplines together to be in conversation with one another. it's different than or different from just saying I'm going to be drawing from these two theories or three theories as part of my theoretical framework. But now you are working with the data and saying, how do I make sense of this data, drawing from different theories so that I can make my interpretations. And the example here is maybe a study exploring the impact of social media on body image. So there are already multiple things embedded in that when you think about the conceptual framework or the concepts that you are working with. There's social media, there's body image. So already you're bringing in different disciplines. When you're thinking about body image, you're immediately thinking about psychology, how people see themselves, how people understand themselves in relation to society outside, and how that affects their self-esteem, their self-image. So all of those will then require you to draw from some psychological theories to be able to think about how that would make sense. But you're also interested in social phenomena, all right? The interaction and realities of people. So from a social perspective or sociological perspective, what does this mean? But you're also speaking about social media. And so social media then means you might draw also from media studies to analyze your data and then potentially reveal very novel PhD. This would be amazing that, because then you're going to really provide very rich interpretations of the work that you would have done or the data that you would have collected. So making meaning of this data would give us very rich conclusions if you were to triangulate theory. And then there's also investigator triangulation or researcher triangulation. And this is where several investigators are used in the analyzing the data on your own, or you're also having peers analyzing with you to check whether what I'm seeing or what I'm finding is also what you're seeing or what you're finding as well. Sometimes you will find that when you engage with your supervisor, and that's why we also want to see your transcripts, and we want to see quotations as well, and say, but how did you deduce that this is the interpretation that you're going to come up with based on what this person is saying? Right? Because when I read what the person is saying, that's not my understanding, right? And then it can lead to an engagement and conversation around how do you then make sense or make meaning of the data. Okay. The findings of each, you and your peer engaging with the data, if that's possible, that's feasible. For you working as a student in a qualification, you would not do that. You have to make sense of the data. So investigator triangulation might not necessarily then be used for you at this stage in your journey. So methodological, theoretical triangulation, and for you who are maybe in the natural sciences, running experiments in the lab, or even running experiments or doing experiments in natural environments, this might be more relevant for you. So using environmental triangulation is where you're looking at the environment, the actual physical environment, the climate, the temperature, all of those things, and the influence of that on the findings that you have. So the setting, what kind of environment are you in? What kind of room are you in? If you go to, you do your research maybe within South Africa, and when you think about the climate conditions of South Africa, and you go and do the same study in Nigeria, the climate conditions of Nigeria are very different from climate conditions in South Africa. So when you get your results, it's also very important to know that these results might be influenced or be impacted by the environment. Are you doing your testing? Are you working with the plants during summer, during winter? And are you looking at whatever phenomena that it is in the natural context in the morning, or is it in the evening? Because even the plants, just like with human beings and how we shift, how we different, and we speak about how you are like this in the morning, your mood is like this in the morning, your mood is like this in the evening. The natural environment also has those processes as well. So you might find that if maybe you run your experiments in the morning, it might be different than if you do in the evening. So the idea is to determine which of these factors influence the information that you receive. And sometimes these are some of the things that we don't account for when we do research. And then next time when you do research and the results are different, and then you're wondering, what happened? But then you don't account for the fact that, no, the last time when you did this research, it was winter. Now you're doing it in summer. Or when you did this, it was in the morning, and now you're doing it in the evening, right? So those things also are very important. So triangulation would mean looking or doing or checking the data or running your experiments at different times and to see whether you will still get the same results. And if you get the same results, then it means, oh, okay, so there's no influence, environmental influence for this phenomenon. But if you do, then also that's an output, that's a finding to say, oh, okay, so it depends on which time of the day that you're doing this, and that will determine what kind of results you're going to get. And data triangulation is the easiest method to implement because it's just using variety of information or data sources in order to increase the validity or credibility of the results. And an example here, you might compare interview transcripts, observation field notes. So here again, that's why it's important that even as you're recording, you must also observe, you must also take notes. And if there are notes again or documents, so secondary data as well. So what are the statistics saying? What am I finding? What are the documents that exist? What are police reports saying vis-a-vis what I'm finding as well? So what are the documents saying? What are the transcripts saying? What are the notes saying? Is there something that you might have missed that maybe is coming up in the recording, or something that you noted maybe, but it's not in the transcript, and then now you have to reflect, what did I hear, or what made me take this note? Because it's not really aligning, or I'm not finding it explicitly in my transcript. And then you have to engage and reflect on those things, and then you write about them. So if they're existing documents as well, maybe your research is contributing to knowledge that exists, that even though the existing statistics are showing us this, my research is showing me or showing us something else. And that's where the contributions also come in as well. And then when you've now collected all this data, when you now have the transcripts and the recordings in front of you, what do you do? Right? The next stage is data analysis. Now you have to sit and analyze the data. You need to work with the data that is in front of you. Okay. So what are some types of data analysis? And this is the thing that I would really like you to take note of, which is very unique to qualitative research. And I know for many of us, it can also be quite confusing as well. The different analysis methods that are there in qualitative research, and sometimes also realizing or seeing that one bleeds into another. So there are also some similarities in the different analysis types. And so it has to be important for you to know what is it that you are interested in in terms of your research? Are you interested in the actual content? Are you interested in seeing or understanding how many times some word or something is mentioned? Are you interested in looking at what is new, that is emanating, that is coming from this data, right? So there are different things that you are interested in. And this is based on what it is that you are exploring. So what you are interested in, what you are asking, what your objective is going to determine what your data analysis method should be, or data analysis approach should be. So some of the types include content analysis and grounded theory. We've already kind of spoken about grounded theory. And as you will see, grounded theory appeared at the very beginning, right? When we were talking about the different paradigms and ways in which to think about your research. It appears also in your research. It appears in your research design. It appears in your data collection, and then it also appears in your data analysis. And why is that the case? Because remember, we said grounded theory is a theory that informs your research from the very beginning throughout to the very end. So even as you're collecting your data, as I'll show now, grounded theory, it goes through all the different aspects or parts of your study. And then narrative analysis is another type, discourse analysis is another type, conversational analysis is another type. And I've just given a few. This is not an exhaustive list, but a few of the researchers and the scholars that have been really authoritative figures in these different types of data analysis. So these are people whose work you can go and read more on if you are interested in a specific type of data analysis. Sometimes it's important to look at various types so that you can be able to make an informed decision and not just decide that I'm interested in this one without engaging with other types of data analysis. Okay. So when you're conducting your analysis, you start analysis immediately. Remember again with grounded theory, immediately means immediately with your first interview. But then with the rest of the other ways in which you collect your data or the design that you use, immediately means as soon as you're done collecting your data, all of your data, you don't put it aside and maybe wait for months or do other things, because you want to start working with the data while it's still fresh in your mind. And yes, you have the transcripts, you have the recording, but remember, you were also an instrument in the collection of the data. So some of the things are still very much fresh in your mind, and you want to already start reflecting on them and start connecting that with the data that you have collected. And if you wait for too long before you start analyzing, some of those things might escape you. And involve more than one person. And here again, you do not do that when you are conducting your studies. So you might involve, if maybe there's someone who's transcribing for you, member checking afterwards to say, did I hear correctly? So you go back. So these are the ways in which you involve other people. Your supervisor is also involved as well. So involving other people does not mean that other people assist you to analyze your data. Remember, I indicated that even if you are using the software tools such as Atlas TI, for example, you still need to do the analysis of the data, and we'll speak to that shortly. Leave enough time, funds for analysis and writing. So if you are having a bursary or a scholarship, make sure that as part of your budgeting, you also budget for the analysis phase. Luckily, through UNISA, as UNISA students, you don't need to pay any money to get access to things like Atlas TI. So you have that access, so you don't need funding for that. However, you will need funding for a transcriber. So if you do not want to personally transcribe your data, then you need to get a transcriber, and then you have to make sure that you have money to be able to pay for a transcriber. All right. So let's get to it. The first one, content and thematic analysis. And I'm putting them alongside each other because of how sometimes they tend to be confused with each other. Okay. Content analysis and thematic analysis are both qualitative research methods, and we use them to analyze the data, but they have fundamental differences in terms of how you would approach them. And as I've said not so long ago, that content analysis it involves systematically categorizing and quantifying the content of a text. So you're interested in the content of what the people are saying, right? So you will still, just like with thematic analysis, you're going to identify themes. You're going to identify patterns that appear, but here you're specifically just looking at the content. What is the content of what the people have, is in this narrative, what is in this interview that I have, and how many times does the word poverty appear? So the frequency of specific words or specific concepts. And again, you need to be guided by your conceptual framework, right? Does it matter that a particular concept is used or not? And if in your conceptual framework or in the conceptualization of your study, certain concepts are integral, are central to your study, then obviously you would pick up on particular concepts that are going to speak to your research. So you draw on those concepts to form part of your analysis, because they will then directly speak to your research questions, right? And content analysis actually is often used in quantitative research because of the nature of it. You're interested in the content and not necessarily the underlying meaning. I hope that makes sense, right? So you're interested in the content as it's presented, what's in front of you. Whereas in other types of analysis, you go further. You're interested in the meaning behind the concept that is being used. All right. And that takes us to thematic analysis. Thematic analysis, with thematic analysis, you want to identify and analyze the theme. So then it's in the name itself. So a thematic analysis, you're interested in themes. What themes are there? What patterns are coming up for you? But also the meaning within the text. So not just patterns, but patterns of meaning that you can then engage with or infer based on what is in front of you. So there is interpretation here. That, okay, you've used the word poverty. How have you used the word poverty, and how have you used it in this sentence or in this context in your response to the question that I asked? And what have you said about poverty? I'm not just interested in the fact that you've mentioned poverty, right? Like, oh, okay, great. But it's also then interpreting. And that interpretation brings you now as the researcher into the picture, right? Because it's also a subjective intervention of meaning making of what people have shared with you. So your aim here is to uncover the underlying meanings and interpretation of the data. Okay. In quantitative, thematic analysis is more flexible and qualitative in nature. So there are different meanings that could be given to one particular form of data that is there. And then this here is really just in a nutshell how you can think about content analysis and thematic analysis. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's really just an overview and a summary of what I've just said. Okay, and because content analysis is often used in quantitative, and it's about frequency, it's about numbers, you are able to use large samples, and there it's more structured and not unstructured. But this is when you're applying it specifically now in quantitative research. But note that even within qualitative research, you can use it, but your mode of analysis will obviously be different. You're just not going to be given numbers, but you also going to speak to those numbers. What does it mean that throughout this interview, poverty seemed to be at the core of what this participant was talking about, right? Yes, maybe your study was about poverty, but in terms of how they've engaged with it, how they've mentioned it, and mentioned it how, alongside what, is also very important. What do we do in qualitative research when we are analyzing data thematically, looking at the themes? The process is very inductive, right? So you start from the specific to the broad, and the specific means then the actual line by line, the coding, and this is when software such as Atlas TI become helpful. You start with the coding and then you move broad. So you start with the specific and then you move broad. Okay. And then you ascribe codes to the codes, and then you work from a number of individual events to establish the pattern. So I've interviewed 20 people, and now I'm starting with the first interview, and then the second, the third. And as you analyze, you get to the fourth, the fifth, you start seeing patterns, right? You start seeing themes emerging based on what people have said. So this is where you often find people saying, okay, 7 of the 10 participants indicated this and that and that and that. And if you had 10 participants, then that, it really shows that that is something that is meaningful or impactful for your participants, that the majority of them actually alluded or spoke to or highlight or responded in a particular way to a particular question, because you would have asked them the same question anyway, right? So, but how they've answered those questions will give you an idea and meaning in terms of what is important and meaningful to them. The codes are driven by the questions. What you have asked them will lead to the codes that you're going to get, will lead to the transcription that you're going to get. Stay focused on primary and specific questions, issues. So how do I deal with all this data, this thick, rich data, which is what we want, which is brilliant. But how make sure that you always, as you engage with your data and analyze your data, keep your research question in mind. What is it in this data that is speaking to what your research is about? Because remember, at the end of the day, you're doing this research so that you can answer a particular question or particular questions. Is this data leading you to answering those questions or that question? Okay. And as I said, your conceptual framework as well. Are the critical concepts coming through? Are you seeing them as you start analyzing the data? And then again, going back to content analysis, I think this example might be useful in terms of how one might think about what content analysis looks like in the context of research. And you can think about this in the context of your own research if you were to think about using content analysis as an approach for yourself. And here's an example. To gain a more qualitative understanding, so this is now your research, you want to gain a more qualitative or you want to gain understanding of employment issues in political campaigns. So if you are interested in content analysis, my colleagues or my students there in communication science, this might ring true to you, but also those of you who are also in political science as well, when we want to understand how politics work and how politics function. But also those of you who are in economic and management sciences, actually, because we're thinking along issues of employment and issues of the economy. So depending again on where you are and how you've structured your question. So if you're coming from economic and management sciences and you're asking this research question, or you're interested in employment issues in political campaigns, or you're coming from political science and you're asking the same question or similar question, the way in which your approach is also going to be different because you are interested in particular things, right? So if you're, even how you then engage with the content will be different. So you could locate the word unemployment in the data that you've received. You say, okay, here's the concept employment. You circle that, okay? It's a concept, it's a code, employment. So what is it that I can connect or link to employment, to think about how different political parties or political leaders speak about employment? If you can think about during campaigns and elections, everybody speaks about how they want to reduce unemployment rates, right? But how do they put their message across? So when you look at political speeches, how do they speak about unemployment? So one political party could speak about unemployment and the economy, and one could speak about unemployment and inequality. One could speak about unemployment and laziness, right? And linking unemployment with inequality or with economy or with laziness, and then putting that into their speech. So what is this party saying? They're saying people are lazy. Are these ones saying that there's a lot of inequality, so they're going to put projects or processes in place to make sure that they get rid of the inequality that is there in society? And if we make sure that inequality, for example, gender inequality, is alleviated and there's gender equality, when you've got gender equality, then it means more women can be employed, you see? So things like that, right? And so you analyze the meanings of these relationships to better understand the intentions and the targets of the different campaigns, right? And that's how you then look at the specific content. And I think speeches offer a good example that you can do a study where you analyze speeches. You can do a study where you say, I'm going to look at this political party's speeches around how they have spoken about unemployment in the past 10 years. So you're saying between 2015 and 2025, how have they engaged in many of their speeches? How have they spoken about unemployment? And then you then do that content analysis and then come up with an interpretation for us and tell us that, no, over the years, this political party has had a very distinct stance, or this political party has shifted and moved over time. This is what they used to say, this is now what they say. Whereas this one has been very consistent. This is what they were saying, this is what they're still saying. Okay, so moving to narrative inquiry. There was a question also yesterday around how do we engage narrative inquiry? What is narrative inquiry? And Connelly and Kleindenen argue that humans are storytellers by nature. Humans are storytelling organisms. When we engage with one another, when we engage with the world, in our interactions, in the things that we're doing, we're telling stories. So either stories as individuals or collectively, but as human beings, we lead storied lives, right? And these stories embody knowledge. And this is knowledge that is accumulated, this experience that we've gained over time. So when we engage in narrative. So we narrate our lives, we narrate our stories. And in this process of telling our story, we set a stage, right? It's almost as if you are when you think about a movie or when you think about a book, we always think about the plot. What is the plot, right? And that tells you or gives you an idea of what this movie is about or what this book is about. So you set the stage for the viewer, you set the stage for the listener, you set the stage for the reader, and then you paint a landscape, right? So you paint this picture that a person has to imagine and think about. So when you are interviewing somebody and they're narrating their story, or people and they're narrating their story, the idea is to paint this landscape, to say, what am I hearing here? What is this the story that is coming across? And how do people portray the events in their lives? And what is the main focus in terms of the narration of the story? So the inquiry is around how we narrate our lives, right? So you as the researcher, you now as the storyteller, as the writer, you stand in a position where you interpret this life. You make meaning of this life based on what has been narrated to you. But when you do this, you also are in a position where you make choices in terms of what do you tell, what do you foreground, what do you put in the background, right? So what becomes bright and what becomes dim. And here it's really a time-consuming process that requires you to think. What is it that you're hearing? What is it that this person is telling you without telling you? What is it that they are showing you? What is it that they are highlighting? But also by highlighting this one thing, what is it that they're leaving out? So you make judgments on what has been told to you. What then becomes relevant in what you choose to tell. Okay, so that's narrative inquiry. And when you've done that, then you say, how do I then analyze this narrative encounter? And there are different ways in which you can do this. As I'm saying, you need to make narrative choices as a researcher. You again can think about the themes. So what are the thematic issues that you think you can put together that can provide a picture of the full story of the narrative that has been told to you? So this is how you might analyze that narrative, right? So you look at the themes. What is said? What is it that's being said? And what am I hearing in what's being said? You can do your study and do a thematic narrative analysis, right? Or you can look at how the story is being told. Where is the beginning? Where is the middle? How is this story being structured? And this is where structural analysis comes. So you look and are interested in the way the story is being told. What is the content? But this content is not the main focus. So the what is being said is not the focus. And this is where the how becomes the focus. So do you see with the first and the second analysis approach, right? And then you can still even move further or do your analysis differently. And this is where now you're looking at the interactional analysis, the emphasis on the dialogue between the teller and the listener. You are also now inserting yourself in the story as the researcher. That what is it that you were hearing as the story is being told? So you were not just a passive listener, but you were an active listener. You did not necessarily contribute in terms of text and words, but you contributed as a listener, as an active listener. So what is it that you heard as you were listening? What were you listening for? right? So, and when you look at it that way, then your interpretation involves a co-construction of the narrative and the meaning as it was articulated by the narrator, but also the meaning that you're giving to it as well. So the two of you are kind of in conversation as well. And then there's performative analysis. And performative analysis, those of you who like going to the theater, going to watch musicals, go to shows, any kind of show, performative analysis would be more practical or relevant in those kinds of spaces where you watch a performance, you watch an artistic expression, and then you provide an analysis of that. So for those of you maybe who would then be doing film studies or doing various forms of visual methodologies where there's the creative making, the data involves the creative making of something, performative analysis might be more relevant for you. Because remember, making or doing a movie or doing a theater production, you are narrating a story, you are narrating something. So you then can draw from performative analysis as your mode of data analysis. All right. Okay, I hope that made sense. And then grounded theory analysis, we've spoken a lot about grounded theory. These are just the specific jargons. And because I've already spoken about this, the jargon now that we use should not be confusing for you, because we said that the grounded theory is really about breaking down from the very beginning, where you start analyzing. And when you start doing that and categorizing your data, it's called open coding. And when you have broken down the data and you've put, you know, when we're still using what the stickers, where you would put a word or you put a code and then you stick it on the wall or you stick it somewhere. So then you pull them apart. And then Excel coding is now where you kind of put them together and you group them together. So you've got all these sticky notes everywhere. And then you say, okay, this one belongs with this one with that one, this one with that one. So you open code before you even start thematizing. You open code, you tear them apart, you put them together. And this is very important, and it's quite a laborious process, because remember, with grounded theory, you are also in the process of developing a theory, right? And then the next one is selective coding. You select the core category, the central issue, the storyline. So you've started with the initial codes, and then you've packed them together, and then you start saying, okay, what am I hearing? And then you start creating a storyline, which we can also then call the central theme, and you relate this to the different categories that are there. So there's one here, there's one there, grouped, and then you look at how they all connect with each other. So you do and have this network. You know, when you think about this pictorially in a diagram, you look at these lines and the networks that move from one core category to another and to another. And this is how you now start grouping and grouping. When all of that are put together, and you start making sense of all of them, even as you continue collecting your data and collecting your data, you start coming up with a theory. You start refining and refining, and at the end, you come up with something that is new. You develop a theory. Not a very easy process, but also a very interesting one as well. Okay, so that's grounded theory. And then discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is verbal and written communication between people, again, where you would have done your interviews, collected your data, and you're working again with the text, and you are, unlike with themes where you will just look at the themes and say, what themes are emanating? What am I hearing? What is the theme here? So the content is around employment, right? And then employment as it relates to inequality. So I'm starting to develop themes, and the theme is about how employment or how inequality leads to high rates of unemployment, right? And then you speak to that in terms of what the participants have said. With discourse analysis, you go deeper, right? It's not just about what is being said, but you're also looking at what the meaning underlying what is being said. So you're also looking at the context, right? So in unemployment, inequality, economy, and here you're saying, okay, what are the social, cultural, political, and historical influences that have contributed or have led to this? So I hear or I see what is coming up here. But it's important for us that as we make meaning of this, we understand it within the social, historical, political context. What has caused inequality in society? What has caused high rates of unemployment among certain people and not other people? And then you can say the high levels of unemployment among women is because of the historical imbalances that are there, right? So you immediately now putting some of the aspects of the social and historical background in, right? So the historical imbalances and the role that patriarchy has played in controlling women's lives, right? And you can even go on to say politically, apartheid in the context of South Africa relegated women to the margins, and it treated women as children. Because during apartheid, women were treated as minors. So as a woman, you were a perpetual child. So you could not buy a house, you could not own things, because the apartheid political system made a determination that women cannot and should not have access to certain spaces. So as we are looking at the challenge of unemployment from a discourse analysis perspective, we are saying that these historical imbalances play a critical role to how women today continue to struggle and be one of the highest members of society that are unemployed, right? If that is your argument. We know that there's been a lot of changes that are happening in place, even though that have taken place, even though we're not where we need to be. But that's how, when you're using discourse analysis, you would come into making meaning of your data. You use language in the body of the data, but you say social reality is socially constructed, right? So you draw from social constructivism, and you also draw from critical paradigm and emancipatory paradigm as well. And you say the way in which the world is understood should not just be understood outside of other factors that are there in the world that play a critical role in people's experiences of life, right? So it goes beyond just the literal meaning to just say, yes, there's high unemployment, women are unemployed. Discourse analysis says, go deeper, right? So if, for example, your research is looking at things like power or inequality, as I've already said, how affluent individuals or people interact with those who are less wealthy. What happens there? The interactions that happen there in terms of power and access to power and what power allows and inequality. If you're interested in how people communicate in a specific context, so how people engage with their colleagues on a day-to-day basis, and how people would behave or act differently if they were in a board meeting. So if you were with a tea room at work, how the engagement would happen would be different than if you were in a board meeting with board members, right? And it could also be about values and beliefs, such as in political speeches, as I've given. So that very same example of the political speech, you can use it to think about how to analyze that text or the content using a discourse analysis. So instead of using content analysis, you draw from discourse analysis. And how do you determine whether to use content analysis or discourse analysis for that same study of political speeches? Again, it's going to depend on what your research question is, right? So discourse analysis can be a powerful tool for assessing social issues, power dynamics, power imbalances. And if your objectives and your aims of your study are interested in that, engaging with these imbalances and social ills and injustices in society, then discourse analysis would be a good fit for you. Okay. All right, and then just quickly, the last one, interpretative phenomenology analysis. IPA is a qualitative research approach, and what it does is it looks into people's experiences and how they make meaning of those experiences. Remember earlier, what did I say? I said that with qualitative research, and when it comes to analysis, you will see that the various analysis approaches kind of connect with one another. So you really have to look closely in terms of what it is that you want to achieve with your research for you to be able to determine and say, okay, would IPA be relevant for me, or would thematic analysis be relevant for me, or would discourse analysis be relevant for me? Some students would just maybe use thematic analysis, and then when work comes from the examiner, or they would say this is the discourse analysis or an IPA, and then the examiner will come and say, this is not IPA, it's just thematic analysis. You've identified the themes and you've analyzed the themes. You did not really engage with the subjective experiences of the people that you had engagements with, right? So when you say what is the experience of living with chronic pain for individuals, and how do they make sense and impact and of the impact of this on their lives? So how you would look at this question from a thematic analysis perspective, and from an IPA perspective would be quite different, right? Because you're not just looking at the themes of the experiences of chronic pain, but you're interested also in the person's actual subjective experience of living with chronic pain, for example. So what you do here, when you get the data, you immerse yourself in the data. So you're not quick to just look for themes and look for patterns. You literally sit with the data, you reflect on the data, and you start noting, you start making notes, and you really engage with the complexities of people's experience, right? Just the immense complexity of living with chronic pain and what that's like, and the emotions that are linked to that, right? So there's close, careful reading of the transcript without being quick to code and being quick to thematize. And it's a dual process of, going back and forth. you also are part of this process, and also the interpretive lens that you use also becomes part of this, right? And I'm sure as I'm talking, you can really see that the line is very thin, right, between how one would look and think about these different analyses. And that's why I would really encourage you to read very closely on a data analysis approach that you want to adopt. With IPA, there's linguistic features, there's descriptive observations, there's statements that you need to sit with, that you cannot just quickly say, okay, this is what this means. Some things could be puzzling, could be confusing. How do you engage with that? How do you deal with that? Your own personal biases and reactions to what people say and how they say it is also very important, right? Maybe you're doing your research in correctional facilities, you're interviewing or engaging participants who have killed people. What does that mean for you as a researcher trying to make sense or meaning of these lived encounters of people? Right? So it's very important that you sit very closely with your data as you do this. And here again, some more information in terms of what you do. There's a unique thing also within IPA, what we call bracketing, right? And the reactions that I've just spoken about, you sitting with this murderer, or convicted murderer, and you're saying, you know, what are some of the assumptions that I have about people that are murderers, right? What is the pre-existing knowledge that I have that they're dangerous, that they cannot be trusted? Are those the things that you're coming up with? And how do you then bracket those and put them aside in a way that is not going to influence how you're going to make meaning of this person's life, understanding what has led them to doing this, where they are in their lives, how they make meaning of where they are right now, but also what they've done and what they've committed in their lives. You know, sitting with that while you've bracketed your own assumptions aside. All right. And again, here there are links that I've also left there for you, because I'd really like you to go and read further on these analysis techniques for you to be able to understand them clearly. Here's a table that just breaks it down for you. If maybe you're kind of confused and say, what is the process? How do I go about? This table, I think, will offer you a good example of how you can think about working with the data when you are drawing or using IPA as your analysis method. And then quickly, in terms of visual methods and analysis here, again, is a collaborative process. Remember when we were talking about photo voice and how when a person comes with the image or images, you engage and you are in conversation and collaboration with the people who took the images, so that the meaning making of what has been done becomes clear in conversation, and that there are no misunderstandings. And analysis is also ongoing. And as you continue analyzing, can inspire new questions throughout the research, as the researcher begins to gain insight into the social cultural realities, how people understand poverty in their community. And as they bring the pictures or the images, how do you then engage with those? How do they give meaning? And meaning can also happen because if you've taken pictures and images, you can even consider doing an exhibition. So you can have an exhibition of the photos that have been taken. And here, this is again part of data dissemination. This is part of maybe also that collaborative process where the participants can also be part of the exhibition, where they can speak about their pictures, or they can be part of the exhibition to be able to be part of the further interpretation of the work. And this also falls within participatory action research, where there's actually action that happens, that takes place. I've given an example of some visuals here. This is part of some of the work that I do in public health, in looking at the experiences of birthing women in our public health institutions. So working with women who've had experiences, we made and created embroideries as a collective effort to be able to depict what that means, what that looks like. So what obstetric violence looks like within our hospital spaces. So working with medical students, but also medical practitioners and midwives, but also community women who have experienced this obstetric violence. So then it becomes a truly collaborative process in how one does research. You might not be able to go that far as part of your qualification, but it's something that you can think about beyond your studies in terms of where is this work going. And this is how you then think about the themes in a nutshell. I'm looking at the time. Unfortunately, time always runs away from us. But these slides will be available to you. And as you go through the slides and there's anything that does not make sense or that you need clarity on, please feel free to reach out. We can have a conversation online on some of these. Here, I just wanted to break it down again for you to say, you start from the data, and then from the data, you come up with codes, and then only after coming up with codes, then you can see the patterns and then eventually come up with themes for your research. And of course, these will look different depending on which data analysis approach you are drawing from, but the process follows logically. And you need to really ask yourself, is this a theme? You know, and how do you determine that something is a theme? Again, based on whether it's just one person who said it or it's just 10 people. Sometimes there's something that comes up that you find very interesting or intriguing, and you want to make it a theme, but it cannot be a theme if it's maybe an outlier. Right? You also need to be able to identify that as well. What is the quality of this theme? What are the boundaries of this theme? So what falls within this theme and what doesn't? Does this quotation really fall within this theme? Is there enough data to support this theme? As I've said, if it's only 2 of the 10 participants, no. Are the data too diverse or wide-ranging? You know, did people say very different things altogether? And what does that then say in terms of the participants that you've had? Are these themes connecting with each other? Because ideally they should, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to understand, to then come to the conclusion of saying, this is what this study is telling us, right? So as I've said, codes are driven by your research questions. Make sure you stay focused on those primary and specific questions of your research that will assist you and make the analysis not too cumbersome, because you won't be looking outside of what your focus of the focus of your study is. Okay. And then the conceptual framework, which I've spoken to. Okay, this is repetition. I apologize about that. And you create a code book, and a code book you create it yourself, or when you're using the qualitative research software, this becomes a bit easier for you, because what Atlas TI does, it assists you with identifying the codes, and then you have to then work with these codes and put them together, and create a guideline. Because if you can code very well, it's going to be easier for you to start seeing patterns and working towards identifying the themes. Okay. You develop the code, and when there's agreement in terms of codes and you've put them together, then you can move to the next segment. As I've said, what a code book does, it provides a clear trail of evidence also for credibility of the study. So even as you're analyzing your data, that's also part of the research, a critical part of the research. Now you also not compulsory, required, but encouraged for now. I'm sure there's going to come a time where it's mandatory, where your data set, your data also has to be submitted as part of your qualification or as part of the submission of your thesis. So all of that information, you need to make sure that you keep, and you keep well. Okay. And here is just an example of a code book in case you're thinking, how do I develop a code book and what might that look like? So you start with the codes. What is the code? And then what does this code mean? And when can I does one use the code? When do I know to use the code? Is it applicable here? Is it not applicable there? All right. And these examples, I'm hoping they'll be useful for you as you try thinking about what all of this could look like in practice. Okay. And then from the codes, you then generate the themes. Codes are very specific, very, very specific, and themes are much broader than the codes. And the codes will be many. As I said, think about sticky notes and many, many sticky notes, right? But then these sticky notes are now online on your computer. And you can't write about all of them. And so that's why you need to then sit with them and see which ones work and which one don't, which ones are aligned to your concepts or conceptual framework of your research, and which ones don't, which ones speak to your research question, right? And that's how then you can be able to put aside what works and what doesn't. And then the same with themes as well. How do you then move from codes to themes? Right? So experiences of the tsunami, right? The categories, what are these experiences? So how do you come to a theme? How do you get to say this is a theme? And I'm establishing a theme. One of my themes in my research is experiences of the tsunami. And why is this a theme? And what would fall under these themes? Where people have spoken about the experiences of survival, flight for survival, where they left the house, where themselves or their members were injured. So these are the experiences that people had. My experience was that I got injured and I lost family members. I was, the experience was just for survival and being safe. So when there are all of those things and many of your participants are talking about these things, then it means these can be put together and form a theme. And all of these aspects will fall under the theme of experiences of the tsunami. Okay. Okay, I think I've already spoken to that. I've already spoken to that as well. And that, okay, so I think we're actually moving towards the end then. And then just one last thing, the importance of reflexivity in qualitative research, because as a researcher, you're also an instrument in the research and you bring in subjective experiences. It's important to also be reflexive as a researcher. And here I'm just offering some thoughts around why it's important to have a section on reflexivity. Right? It's important because it assists you to be able to be aware of your own assumptions, your own biases. Sometimes we fail to notice these biases, or we fail to notice things because it's things that we often take for granted. Things that we say, okay, it's just common sense. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually something very critical for the study. Right? It helps us to not skip over things. It also strengthens the trustworthiness of our research. So that is very, very important. And then finally, please, as you go and conduct your research, please remember that we must always be ethical in the research that we're doing, and making sure that there is consent from your participants, making sure that you respect confidentiality and anonymity. And here, this is something that is negotiated. It's not, it just doesn't go without saying. Some participants might actually want their names to be mentioned, to be used. And so that then becomes negotiated. It's not just a taken for granted. Some people don't want to be called P1 or P2 or participant 1, or given synonyms where they're given other names that are not their names. And so in that way, their stories are almost now stories of other people and not of themselves. Prevention of deception. Let people know exactly what it is that you're going to be doing, and at the end, do exactly what you said you're going to do, right? Be careful also on how you store your data. We've got cloud. Laptops get lost, recording devices get lost. You use your cell phone to record data. Who's got access to your cell phone? So if you've spoken about confidentiality, but somebody else has got access to your phone, is it still confidential? Because maybe they might listen to that recording. So be very careful of things like that as well. Make sure you get permission linked to informed consent. Make sure that your work maintains academic standards at all time. And in everything that you do in the research, as you collect your data, as you identify participants, as you analyze, all of these different stages have got potential to cause harm. So what is it that you're saying about your participants? Right? There was a study that was done in the Western Cape at one of the sister institutions, where at the end they came to the conclusions or interpretation saying that a certain group of people have got a limited cognitive ability, right? And that obviously caused a huge uproar, because how do you make such interpretations? What kind of questions did you ask your participants? And what led you to that kind of conclusion? So you must make sure that your study does not cause harm, even in how you engage or relate with your participants. At the end of the day, it's about making the world a better place, but it's also about making sure that there is respect for people. Okay. All right, so we have some time to engage with the questions. Would observing social behavior of influencers through their social media footprint seen as a visual methodology? If so, which one? No, but remember, with visual methodology, there has to actually be action. So here you're saying it's in your question. You're doing an observation, but this observation is a one-way observation. So you're actually doing what? You're doing an analysis of the behavior of influencers online. So there is no action there. There is no activity. So you're using social media. So it's not a visual method. So there is no action or activity that is done. You're not taking pictures. You're looking at the pictures that already exist. If maybe you're looking at the pictures, so you are doing an analysis of the visuals of social influencers online. All right, there are some elements or aspects of visual methods that you can draw from, but your study would not be a visual methodology study in that sense. Okay. Can I use independent coder for triangulation after I've done the data collection through interviews? Yes, you can. You can, because you're doing that to. You would have also coded, which is what is required, what's important. So you use an independent coder to be able to check whether what they find is also what you would have found as well. And you can reflect on that in your study as part of explaining how you went about working with your data and coding your data. right? So you will not be using what they've found, but you will be using what you found, and then you can make a determination based on whether what they find and what you find is the same or not, because then you have to ask questions. If the findings are not the same, then you need to go back to the drawing board and start re-looking at your work and saying, okay, what might have or could have happened here that has led us to two different conclusions or two different results. Okay, so it's very important. I think at the core of it, remember, this is your study. Your name is going to be put at the front page of that thesis or dissertation. So you need to have done the work yourself. Okay, so in terms of triangulation, no, absolutely. Frank, I think I explained that. So data triangulation and theory, with theory triangulation, you are specifically looking at the theory. Data triangulation, you're looking at the data, the actual data that you have collected from the research. With theory triangulation, you are looking at the actual theories. So that example of social media and body image, and I was saying you can draw from multiple theories as a way to triangulate, to look at the different ways in which you can make meaning of the data. Is you can draw from a sociological perspective, psychological perspective, but also media studies perspective, and say, drawing from this, when we look at this from a media studies perspective using so-and-so's theory, this is what this is telling us about social media and body image. And in addition, or however, or alongside this psychology theory of what tells us, or it shows us the impact of the public scrutiny of somebody's body and how that might affect a person's self-esteem or self-image, right? So it's bringing multiple theories as a way to make sense of your data from a theoretical perspective. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so you might have drawn from a particular theory in your theoretical framework chapter, but as you work with your data and analyzing your data, then you bringing in other theories to say, what this data is telling us and what we're seeing on how the participants have engaged on, or they've articulated how they feel they have low self-image as a result of how they are portrayed. This aligns to this psychological theory that says that if people experience this or do this, this is how they're going to be affected. All right, which is different from data triangulation. And the previous question that was asked around whether one could use an independent coder would then answer your question around data triangulation. Data triangulation is when you code and you work and analyze your data, and then you have another way or somebody else analyzing your data as well. So it's working with data specifically. So you should be led by the initial word: data triangulation, theory triangulation, environmental triangulation, right? So all of these tell you what it is that you need to be looking for or looking at. And methodological triangulation, where you can use both qualitative and quantitative. So you're specifically looking at the method. So this would be at the very beginning, before you even collect your data. You're triangulating your data in that sense. So you're using mixed methods to then be able to get data that can speak to one another or corroborate one another or enrich one another. So hence we're saying it's a cross examination or cross-fertilization, if you will. You look at the data, tell me what you see. I look at the data, tell you what you see. And then based on that, we can be able to say whether our interpretation of the data is the right interpretation of the data, because we're using the same data. How can we use the same data and find different things? Then it means we need to rethink what's happening, right? I hope that answers you, Frank. What's the difference between settings and locations as far as environmental triangulation is concerned? So if I think a quick example of showing the difference, if you were to be specific. So your lab, where you're doing your experiment could be perceived as the setting where you're doing your research. And then when we're looking at the location, it could be different locations more broadly. So a location in terms of Pretoria, in terms of Johannesburg, in terms of another country, so a different location. Whereas within that location, there can be different settings as well. Okay, so sometimes they tend to be used interchangeably, but generally a setting, we would think of a setting as more directed and more specific than in a location which speaks to a broader space. Okay. Okay, Frank, yeah, so just continuing on your question on data triangulation and theoretical triangulation, I hope what I've just said answers you. Tell me if it doesn't. If I review my transcripts with the videoed interviews and check if the transcripts were accurately captured as shown in the video, reread the transcripts and listen to the videos again, am I doing data triangulation? But what are you doing with the data? Because data triangulation is about, and maybe the explanation of it. It's about what you do with the data. It's not about the data itself, right? I hope that makes sense. So here you're saying there's the videoed interviews, and then so the recorded interviews, whether they're recorded audio or in video, and then you check the transcripts. But what's in the transcript should be exactly what's in the videoed interviews, because my take would be that you have transcribed what was in the video. Am I understanding you correctly, Anonymous? It's not videoed interviews of different people. It's still the same people that you have the transcript. So the transcript, unless in this case, the challenge could then be that the transcription was not done correctly. And this is why sometimes we're a bit reluctant to say, we like to encourage you to do the transcription yourself. You can hire somebody to do the transcription for you. And if you're using a professional transcriber, then everything should go well. But sometimes when you do things yourself, you know exactly what you're going to get out, right? So if the interviews were recorded, either in video or audio, what's in the transcription needs to be the same as what's in the video. Otherwise, it just means the transcription was not done correctly. That's not triangulation, or data triangulation specifically. Data triangulation is actually working with the data and looking at how to make sense of that data in different ways. Okay. Can you use both content and thematic analysis? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can use both, and then you will need to be able. You can use both of them if your research question says or allows for that to happen. So if your research question was not saying anything about being interested in the frequency of something, in understanding the content of a particular experience, then you should use thematic analysis. There's some alignment, but as I've articulated and shown, they are different as well. So you can use both. You just need to justify. That's all. You need to justify. One does not take away anything from the other. They can enrich each other, but then you need to know that it's going to be a lot of work for you, because you cannot just do content analysis for one participant and not for the other. So you would need to do for all of them, and it's cumbersome and time consuming. So that's why it's very important to decide which one you're going to go for, particularly because for many of these qualitative data analysis processes, there are some similarities in terms of how they approach the analysis. So because there are these similarities, you can zone in on aspects of content analysis, even when you're using thematic analysis. But if you've got the time, you may. In a study embedded and entrenched in a feminist landscape, can one combine critical discourse analysis and thematic analysis? I think my answer would be like the previous one, but I don't see why you would want to use discourse analysis and thematic analysis, because critical discourse analysis, within critical discourse analysis, there are themes. You'll be looking at patterns and themes, but you're going beyond that, right? And this is where I keep saying there are similarities, but there are also points of diverging, right? And critical discourse analysis would diverge from thematic analysis by adding other layers, right? So it's not just interested in the themes, but it's interested in, okay, what is it that's coming up? Okay, that's a theme, but what is it also that's underlying that is happening here? So what critical discourse analysis does, it allows you to move beyond just the themes. It moves you to, you know, the other layers of some of the challenges and complexities around feminist landscape, becoming feminist issues that you'd be interested in. If we use an AI app to transcribe for us, is this fine, Prof? Dailene, I'm not sure how often you use AI, hey? Well, especially if you're using it in the moment. But there are AI apps that when you put in the data, it can transcribe for you. So if you do get an AI app, that only just transcribes. It does not analyze or interpret or do anything. You can transcribe because it's the same as using any other transcription facility, whether another human being, or because some of the transcribers actually also use certain platforms to be able to transcribe for them. So is it fine to use AI? Absolutely. You need to make sure that the transcription is done correctly, though, because sometimes with the accent, with the language and how people, sometimes there might be a lot of corrections and revisions that you might need to do as you go through the transcription. So even as the app transcribes for you, I'll always suggest that you always go back to the recording, even when and generally, even if you're not using AI, when you have a transcription and when you start interpreting and analyzing the data, make sure that your recording is also handy, because sometimes you want to hear, right? You want to hear what the person said, and in that moment, because sometimes hearing assists for you to be able to interpret, not only just based on the text, because sometimes the text is not the same as the actual speaking. Okay. Okay, I see many of you are interested in combining analysis approaches, huh? Can one use both narrative analysis and thematic analysis in a qualitative study? Again, there is so much alignment in the two. And when you use narrative analysis, again, and let me say, thematic analysis is almost the baseline, right? Thematic analysis is the baseline. When you're working within qualitative research and you are analyzing your data, you are interested in seeing what themes are emanating. You are interested in finding themes that are going to assist you to be able to answer your research question, right? That's what you're interested in. So the thematic analysis is the baseline. And you can say, I'm interested in the themes and making meaning of these themes, and then full stop. What these other narrative approaches, data analysis approaches allow you to do is that they allow you to kind of move from the baseline to add other layers, into your analysis process. And if you look at it that way, then you can see that there is no need to combine the two, because the other is somewhat embedded in the others. I hope that makes sense, eh? Because I'm trying to avoid you making life difficult for yourself in trying to combine things and then confusing yourself as you do so. And so if you take thematic analysis as your baseline, that will assist you to be able to then say, yes, I'm interested in the themes, but I'm also interested in the how, in the why, in the structure, in the case of narrative, in the plot, but I'm also interested in these historical, social, cultural influences that determine how people construct their lives, right? So you're moving into discourses, that it's not just the themes that I'm interested in, but it's also all these other structures that I'm interested in. Okay, I hope that answers you. Okay, thank you for the comment, Eileen. All right, so what is the difference between quotations and codes? Anonymous, the quotations are the actual words of the participants that you're going to be using to be able to analyze and make sense of your data. The codes are going to be those little snippets that you pick from the actual data. So it's not quotation. So you can have codes in your results chapter or your results, your findings chapter, but you need to have the voices. So the quotations would be chunks, right? Quotations would be chunks of what people say. All of these emanate from your transcripts, right? All of them come from your transcripts. Your themes come from your transcripts. Your quotes come from your transcripts. But your quotations are not part of that analysis process in the strict sense. So you're looking at the quotes, and then you're looking at the themes, and then for you to be able to support these themes and the things that have come up as you saying these are my themes are going to be determined by the quotations that you're going to be using. Okay, so the codes would be short things, right? So you can say poverty. Poverty is a code. Unemployment is a code. What? Inequality is a code. Women is a code, right? So these are little aspects that already speak to what you're interested in, right? So this study is about women. This study is about the challenges and the experiences of women farmers, right? And so when you say women, and when you say inequality, when you say unemployment, when you say poverty, how do all of these link to the experiences of women farmers, right? So these are your codes, and you say, okay, how do I combine these codes, right? And then you say, okay, poverty and inequality, I'm putting them together. So now you are developing your code book, right? Atlas TIA will help you with all of this. And then you say, okay, what else? What other codes speaks to this or can be aligned to this? And then you say, okay, women aligns to this, right? So now you've got your poverty, you've got inequality, you've got women. And then you're looking at how many, as you go and you're saying, okay, this appears in 17 out of the 20 participants that I've spoken to. They've all spoken about women and the challenges as women farmers, and they linked this to poverty. And then many of them also link this to inequality, that we don't have access to finances, to loans in banks because we don't own property, all of those things. And then you say, okay, all of these codes put together can now can be made into a theme. So what theme can emanate from this? If I put poverty and inequality, then you develop a theme. And then based on this theme, you say, what is it from the transcripts or from the participants that is going to support this theme of mine? This is when you bring in quotations. Where do these come from? And then you bring in quotations. Okay, I hope that makes sense for you. Roger, that's a tricky one. Can one change the analysis approach after collecting the data? It is possible. That's a simple answer. It is possible. I've actually seen some analysis approaches being changed after the examiner comes back with feedback and suggesting that, no, actually, this is not discourse analysis. It's more of a thematic analysis. So I think the student should reframe and rework that chapter and then rework some of the results so that it's aligned to thematic, because the way that it's done is not discourse, it's thematic, or the other way around. So then you can revise and decide whether you're going to do that labor of doing it and making it a truly discourse analysis study or analysis, or you are going to say, okay, if what I already have is deemed to be okay, but it's argued that it's actually not this, it's that, then that's what I'll go with, then less work for you. But if you say, no, but I still want my study to be deemed as discourse, then you have to do the labor of sitting with your supervisor for another month or 3 months or 6 months, working it, reworking it. So the answer is yes, Roger. Bracketing is a form of reflexivity, Anonymous. Remember, bracketing falls within a specific approach of working with data and analysis. And as the researchers and the scholars thought about how a researcher brings him or herself into the study, they suggested that you need to bracket your experience, your assumptions, your judgments. You need to do that so that they do not influence the research that you're doing, in particular as you're doing IPA research. And reflexivity is just broadly looking at the actual research process itself. And so your own positionality, how you come into this research, even saying, I'm doing this research because of the experiences that I've had myself or people that I know have experienced this, and that's why I was interested in this research. So that's part of your reflexivity as well. So bracketing and reflexivity in terms of what they aim to do, what they're about, yes, very much the same. It's just that bracketing is a kind of wording or jargon that would be used as part of IPA in terms of the analysis steps that one would need to do. It just assists you to do, at this stage, you do this, you work with the data, you do that, and then you bracket, right? Which is a form of reflexivity. Let's put it like that. Bracketing is a form of reflexivity. Reflexivity is much broader. Okay. Can you use context and setting interchangeably? Yes, you can. Anonymous, can you send the interview questions to the participants if they're busy for them to answer and send back to you? Yes, not encouraged, but it is allowed. As we've said in the past 3 days, I'm sure you can already see many of the things that you will be missing out on as a researcher. In getting the depth that you might want to get. I've been involved in a study where the questions were sent to me, but that was followed up by an actual online engagement where we engaged on the interviews and the answers, the interview and the answers that I had given. So if that option is there, one might consider that. But it is not encouraged. But if maybe you are working in a space, like I said before, if maybe you're working with CEOs who are almost always in meetings, or vice chancellors who are almost always in meetings, that might be the way to go, so that when they've got time, they can respond to your questions and send them back to you. Some of the participants actually suggest that themselves. I had a student where the participant said, no, can you just send me the questions and then I'll respond and send them back to you. So that is an option. It's sad that you'll be missing out on so much of what qualitative research requires of us, but you can do it. How do you maintain trustworthiness when using observation as data collection tool? Well, remember, even as you are doing observations, you still need to make your notes and you still need to record what it is that you're observing. And that contributes also towards the trustworthiness of the work that you're doing. Remember, it's about your work being valid, but it's also, when you're doing observation, you still need to follow all the different steps of doing research. So what you would do when you're doing interviews and what you would do when you're just observing would be similar. And with observation, the only thing is that you're not interactive and participating in the way that you would with interviews, but the processes of actually gathering the data, of making sure that you record what you observe, all the different steps still follow. Okay. Triangulation, can I use data from interviews with data from documentation to triangulate? Yes, that is part of the example that I gave you. May definitely do that. I can use thematic analysis with IPA. Okay, all of you want to combine. My previous answer still stands. Okay. That if you choose to do that, you can, but you really need to indicate how is that going to add value to your study, and in what ways are you going to be distinguishing between the two? What is this one offering that this one is not, and what is this offering that this one is not? Because sometimes one is already embedded in the other. The other is just pushing forward. Okay, which would be IPA in this case. But with IPA, it's really, really being interested in subjective, lived emotions and experiences of people, and interpreting that phenomenon in that sense. Whereas with a thematic, you're looking at those themes. I hear you say if one wants to change analysis method, they would have to rework or redo what is already done. Yes, to suit the new method, and that could take up to 3 to 6 months. Why is that process long? No, it depends when that happens. It depends when that happens. At what point would you want to change your analysis method? Is it already at the end? The example that I was giving, and sorry, Anonymous, if I scared you, the example that I was giving was based on a work that had already undergone examination. So, you know, when you submit your thesis or dissertation and it goes for examination, it comes back, you as the student are given time to be able to revise your work. And so there is a certain amount of time that you're given. So I was just working within that time frame, depending on what the feedback is. If it's just minor corrections, but usually when there's methodological issues that are seen as huge, it might require long. So if the university can give you up to 3 months or a year where you might need to re-register. So depending on what the feedback is, that will determine the amount of time that you would be given to revise your work. It might take you shorter than that, right? It might take you 2 weeks if you're just sitting with it and only working on that, if maybe it's part of the revisions that the examiners have requested. If it's something that is in conversation just with your supervisor while you're busy with the research and not after examination and suggested by the examiner that you should, it will be a different process altogether. No, it will not automatically or necessarily take that long, Anonymous. It might take shorter. It might take a shorter period of time. Okay, I hope that alleviates your concern. Okay. Can you do survey analysis and semi-structured interviews? I would need the context for your question because I'm not sure what you mean and how you're combining the two. So it'll be difficult to respond. Perhaps you can explain more and maybe send me an email. I realize we've run out of time, and thank you so much for staying on. Frank, Moss and Field is but just one of the scholars that you might draw from, and I would encourage you to also look at other scholars as well, especially if you want to combine different analysis methods so that you can see also what literature says and also look at examples of how that has been done before. So go and read up and check, and then look at examples of studies where they've combined content and thematic analysis and how they've done it, and what the possible complexities or challenges there are with it, or whether it's easy to do, and for what kind of studies one might consider combining the two. So you can start with Moss and Field, but I would encourage you to read wider and even look at examples of studies that have done so. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here now. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending these sessions, and I hope that they were helpful. And as I've said, this is our last session on qualitative research methodologies and research designs. If you still have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email. I said my email address is available online, I believe, but I'm also dropping it here as well on the chat. Please have a look at it and feel free to contact me. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you at future sessions that we're going to be tackling. But all the best with the rest of your studies. Goodbye, everybody.